The caramel macchiato hit the Italian marble floor with the sound of a fractured bone. It did not merely spill, it exploded across the pristine lobby of the Haesung Corporation headquarters, a violent starburst of scalding milk, sugar, and dark roast. Amara felt the heat of it through the thin cotton of her gray uniform trousers before she registered the pain. The liquid soaked into the fabric just above her right knee, burning her skin. She did not flinch. She did not gasp. At 63, her body was a map of aches, burns, and phantom pains accumulated over a lifetime of invisible labor. One more burn was just a new country on that map. Ah, damn it! Watch where you leave your bucket, Auntie. The voice belonged to Director Choi. He was 28, wearing a bespoke navy suit that cost more than Amara earned in 3 years. He had not tripped over her yellow mop bucket. Amara had parked the bucket flush against the structural pillar, exactly as the employee manual dictated. Choi had simply swung his arm too wide while gesturing to a laughing junior executive, launching his oversized paper cup directly into Amara's airspace. "My apologies, Director," Amara said. Her voice was a low, textured rasp. It held the cadence of a woman who measured her words carefully, knowing the exact weight of each syllable. English was the mandated language of the international lobby, but Choi preferred to sneer in Korean. Amara understood enough of it to know when she was being degraded. "Just clean it up," Choi muttered, checking the cuff of his shirt for splatter. Finding none, he smirked at his colleague. "These old women, they hire them cheap, but they're practically blind. Smells like bleach and mothballs the second you walk into the building now." The junior executive laughed, a sharp, metallic sound that echoed off the 50-foot glass ceilings. They walked away, their leather-soled shoes clicking sharply against the stone, leaving Amara kneeling in a puddle of spreading brown liquid. Amara slowly lowered herself onto her aching knees. The marble was freezing against her shins, a stark contrast to the burning coffee soaking her thigh. She pulled the heavy, damp strings of the mop from the wringer. The smell of ammonia rose up, stinging her nostrils, cutting through the sickly sweet scent of the spilled syrup. She wiped the floor with methodical, rhythmic strokes. Press, pull, wring, repeat. She locked her jaw, refusing to let the humiliation curdle into tears. Tears were a luxury of the young. Amara only possessed endurance. 70 floors above, suspended in a cage of reinforced glass and steel, Chairman Park Tae-jun stood entirely still. He had seen the whole thing. The private express elevator had been descending silently down the spine of the tower, dropping him toward the subterranean parking garage. Tae-jun was 68 years old, a billionaire 3 times over, and completely hollow. He suffered from an insomnia so profound it felt like a terminal disease. The doctors called it hyperarousal of the nervous system. Tae-jun knew it was simply the noise of his own empire eating him alive. From his vantage point in the glass elevator, the lobby below looked like a microscopic slide. He watched the young director drop the cup. He watched the laughter, but most intensely he watched the old African woman in the gray uniform. He did not intervene. He did not press the emergency stop button. Tae-jun was not a hero. He was a ruthless businessman who had spent 40 years excising the weakness from his own soul. But as he watched the woman kneel, not with submissiveness, but with a terrifying, stoic dignity, something twisted in his chest. She moved like a queen forced to scrub her own tomb. There was no frantic pleading, no cowering. Her spine was perfectly straight as she wrung out the mop. The artificial neon lights of Seoul bled through the rain-streaked windows, casting long, fractured shadows across her dark skin. Tae-jun stared at the stark white of her hair, cropped close to her scalp, glowing like a halo under the harsh lobby fluorescence. For the first time in 6 months, the relentless, high-pitched ringing in Tae-jun's ears stopped. The elevator doors chimed and parted, opening to the freezing concrete of the executive garage. His driver was waiting, holding open the door of a black Maybach. Tae-jun stepped out. The air smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. "Home, Chairman?" the driver asked, keeping his eyes respectfully lowered. Tae-jun looked back toward the frosted glass doors leading to the service corridors. The silence in his head was fragile, temporary. He could already feel the buzzing anxiety returning to the edges of his skull. "No," Tae-jun said. His voice was like dry leaves crushing together. "Take the car back. I am going up." It was 2:14 a.m. when Amara pushed her heavy, squeaking utility cart onto the 71st floor, the executive suites. The carpet up here was so thick it felt like walking on moss. The air conditioning was set to a glacial 64 degrees, designed to keep men in heavy wool suits alert. Amara shivered, wrapping her thin regulation cardigan tighter across her chest. She moved into the chairman's corner office. It was a massive expanse of dark walnut, brushed steel, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River. The river looked like a ribbon of black ink cutting through the glowing circuitry of the city. Amara reached into her cart for the microfiber cloth and the lemon polish. She approached the massive desk. "Leave the desk." Amara froze. The voice came from the deep shadows in the corner of the room. She blinked against the dim lighting, her pulse spiking. Slowly, a figure emerged from the high-backed leather chair turned toward the window. It was the chairman. Amara recognized his face from the bronze plaque in the lobby and the mandatory orientation videos. Park Tae-joon. He was wearing a white dress shirt, the collar unbuttoned, the silk tie discarded on a side table. His face was a landscape of deep, harsh lines, pale and exhausted. His eyes were completely bloodshot. "I apologize, sir," Amara said, immediately bowing her head, stepping backward. "I was told the office would be empty. I will return later." "Stand still," Tae-joon ordered. It wasn't a shout, but a command that carried the gravitational pull of absolute authority. Amara stopped. She kept her eyes fixed on his polished black shoes. The silence in the room became a physical weight. She could hear the faint hum of the air vents. She could smell the expensive peaty aroma of the scotch sitting untouched in a crystal glass on his desk. "Why didn't you throw the mop water at him?" Tae-joon asked. Amara looked up, startled by the question. Tae-joon's dark, tired eyes were locked onto her. He wasn't mocking her. He was studying her, like a man trying to read a map in a language he had forgotten. "Sir, Director Choi, in the lobby, 7 hours ago," Tae-joon said, stepping forward. He moved with a slight stiffness in his left hip. "He humiliated you. I saw it from the elevator. You had a bucket of dirty water. He had a dry suit. Why didn't you equalize the situation?" Amara's grip tightened on the handle of her cart. The plastic dug into her calloused palms. She evaluated the man before her. He possessed the power to terminate her employment with a flick of his wrist. She needed this job. She needed the money to send back to her sister in Dakar, to pay for the insulin that kept her niece alive. Pride was a heavy stone. She had learned to put it down a long time ago. "Because, sir," Amara said, her voice steady, "a clean suit can be bought. A quiet conscience cannot. If I throw the water, I carry his ugliness home with me. I prefer to leave the dirt where it belongs." Tae-joon stopped walking. He stood about 4 feet from her. The faint smell of bleach radiating from her uniform met the scent of his aged scotch. He stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. The muscle in his jaw feathered. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Amara." "Amara," he repeated. The syllables felt foreign in his mouth, but they carried a strangely grounding rhythm. "How old are you, Amara?" 63, sir." Tae-joon looked out the window at the sprawling, infinite city. Millions of lights, millions of people screaming for more money, more power, more time. "I am 68, he murmured, almost to himself. "I have built all of this. And yet, you are the first person I have spoken to all year who does not sound like a beggar or a thief." He walked back to his desk, heavily lowering himself into his chair. He rubbed his temples with trembling fingers. "Finish the room, Amara, but do it quietly. My head is splitting open." Amara watched him for a second longer. She saw the tremor in his hands. She saw the hollow gray exhaustion beneath his eyes. He wasn't a god of capitalism. He was just an old, tired man slowly dying of his own success. She turned back to her cart. She moved with practiced, silent grace. She wiped the glass, emptied the wastebaskets, and vacuumed the perimeter. Before she left, she noticed the untouched scotch. She walked over to the desk. Tae-joon had closed his eyes, his breathing shallow and erratic. Amara reached into her deep apron pocket. She pulled out a small, foil-wrapped bundle she kept for her own aching joints. It contained dried hibiscus leaves, crushed ginger root, and clove. She placed it gently on the edge of his walnut desk, right next to the crystal glass of alcohol. "Put that in hot water, Chairman." Amara whispered. "It is better for the blood than poison." She wheeled her cart out of the room. When the heavy oak door clicked shut, Tae-jun opened his eyes. He looked at the crushed, fragrant leaves in the foil. For the first time in years, he reached for something other than the scotch. The midnight sanctuary became a ritual. It was not planned, nor was it ever explicitly discussed. It was a silent, gravitational pull that aligned their orbits at precisely 2 a.m. every Tuesday and Thursday. The corporate headquarters of Haesung was a ghost ship in those hours. Amara would push her cart into the 71st floor suite, and Tae-jun would be there. Sometimes he was reviewing contracts under the harsh glare of a single desk lamp. Sometimes he was simply staring out at the frozen Han River, watching the ice floes crack and splinter in the black water. Over the weeks, the silence between them evolved. It lost its sharp defensive edges and softened into a comfortable architecture. On the fourth week, Amara brought a dented stainless steel thermos. She placed it on his desk without a word. Tae-jun looked at the thermos, then up at her. The neon light from the city reflected in his dark, tired eyes. He unscrewed the cap. A thick, fragrant plume of steam rose into the hyper-conditioned air. The scent of earthy hibiscus, sharp ginger, and sweet clove immediately overpowered the sterile smell of the office. Tae-jun poured the dark red liquid into a porcelain cup. He lifted it to his lips. The heat traveled down his throat. A sharp, organic fire that bloomed in his chest. It tasted like damp earth, survival, and care. "My mother used to make something like this," Tae-jun said softly, staring into the dark red reflection in his cup. "When we were very poor, after the war. She boiled bark and roots. It was bitter. We drank it to trick our stomachs into feeling full." Amara paused her dusting of the bookshelves. She looked at the stooped shoulders of the billionaire. "In my village, we drank this not to trick the stomach, but to quiet the blood," Amara said. Her voice was an anchor in the massive floating room. "When the winds were too loud and the harvest was too thin, my father would drink this. He said a man cannot fight the world if his own mind is at war." Tae-jun nodded slowly. He took another sip. "My mind has been at war for 40 years, Amara. I don't know how to sign a peace treaty." "You start by going to sleep," she replied, returning to her work. And miraculously he did. The insomnia that had tortured Tae-jun, resisting ambient noise machines, prescription sedatives, and meditation therapists, began to fracture. He would drink Amara's tea, listen to the rhythmic sweeping sound of her cloth against the wood, and find himself nodding off in his leather chair. Amara would finish her shift, drape his discarded suit jacket over his shoulders to keep out the chill of the air conditioning, and slip out the door. But a sanctuary built on a battlefield cannot remain hidden forever. The shift in Tae-jun was noticeable. The deep purple bruising under his eyes began to fade. The tremor in his hand disappeared. He stopped screaming at the board of directors during the morning briefings. The executives, trained like feral dogs to smell any change in the alpha's blood, began to whisper. Director Choi, the man who had spilled the coffee, was the most observant. He had ambitions. He needed to know what had sedated the dragon. Choi began staying late. He bribed the security guards for the elevator logs. He reviewed the CCTV footage of the 71st floor. What he saw made his lip curl in disgust. The chairman of Haesung Corporation, a man who moved markets with a phone call, was sitting in his office drinking, out of a dented metal thermos, talking to the elderly African cleaner. Rumors spread through the glass corridors like a biological weapon. The chairman is losing his mind. He's taking counsel from a janitor. Does the old man have a fetish for the help? Amara felt the change in the atmosphere before she heard the whispers. The security guards who usually ignored her began to sneer. The younger female employees would step out of the elevator if she stepped in, dramatically covering their noses as if her very presence was a contagion. The air in the building grew thick with hostility. Then came the trap. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Amara was called to the HR department on the 5th floor. The room was aggressively bright, the walls painted a sterile, psychiatric white. Director Choi sat behind a glass table. Next to him was the head of human resources, and in the corner, arms crossed, face a mask of stone, stood Chairman Park Tae-jun. Amara's heart did not flutter, but it hardened. She recognized an execution squad when she saw one. Amara, Director Choi began, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. We have a very serious issue. A limited edition Mont Blanc pen, valued at $4,000, went missing from my desk 2 nights ago. You were the only cleaner logged on my floor. I did not take your pen, Amara said calmly. She did not look at Choi. She looked at Tae-jun. The chairman's eyes were locked on the floor, his jaw tight. We checked your locker, Amara, the HR director said, pushing a plastic evidence bag across the table. Inside, gleaming with grotesque accusation, was the silver Mont Blanc pen. Security found it wrapped in your spare uniform. Amara stared at the bag. The cold reality of the frame-up washed over her. It was clumsy, lazy, and entirely effective. Who would the police believe? A 28-year-old Korean executive with a flawless pedigree, or a 63-year-old African immigrant with a mop? I did not take it, Amara repeated. Her voice dropped an octave, resonating with a deep, furious dignity. Someone placed it there, Choi scoffed. Please, you people send every dime you make back to whatever dirt-poor country you crawled out of. It's pathetic, really. But stealing from the company? That is a police matter. There will be no police. The voice cracked through the room like a whip. Tae-jun stepped forward out of the shadows. Choi immediately straightened his posture, bowing his head slightly. Chairman, Choi said smoothly, we must make an example. Security protocols. I said there will be no police, Tae-jun repeated, his voice cold, devoid of the warmth he possessed in the midnight hours. He looked at Amara, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking through her. He was projecting the impenetrable armor of the billionaire. Tae-jun was calculating the optics. If the police came, the press would dig. The tabloids would find out about his late-night meetings with the cleaner. His shareholders, already nervous about his health, would panic. He thought he was calculating the best outcome for everyone. Keep the police away. Save her from jail. Save himself from scandal. Pay her a severance, Tae-jun ordered HR, his tone entirely clinical. 3 months' wages, terminate her contract immediately, have her escorted from the building. I don't want a scene. Amara felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't the loss of the job that struck the fatal blow. It was the cowardice. She looked at the man she had poured tea for, the man she had covered with a jacket when the cold made his bones ache. In the bright, unforgiving light of day, he was exactly what the world said he was, a ruthless, empty vessel protecting his gold. Tae-jun finally met her gaze. He expected to see relief that she wasn't going to prison. Instead, he saw something that made his stomach drop into a bottomless abyss. He saw pity. Amara did not argue. She did not cry. She slowly reached into the pocket of her gray cardigan. She pulled out her plastic employee ID badge and placed it gently next to the stolen pen. The plastic clicked against the glass table. Keep your severance, Amara said softly. The texture of her voice was like crushed gravel. I do not take money I have not earned, and I do not accept charity from a beggar. Choi bristled, stepping forward. Watch your mouth. Amara ignored him entirely. She kept her eyes on Tae-jun. You are starving, Chairman, and all the money in this building will not fill your stomach. She turned and walked out of the room. The door hissed shut behind her. Tae-jun stood frozen. The silence in the room was absolute. But inside his head, the deafening, high-pitched ringing had already returned, screaming like a dying animal. The fracture in Tae-jun's reality was immediate and catastrophic. By the third night without Amara, the 71st floor felt like a cryogenic tomb. The heavy walnut furniture seemed to absorb all light, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered nothing but a view of a city that felt utterly alien. Tae-jun poured himself a scotch, lifted it to his lips, and violently hurled the crystal glass against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 glittering diamonds, raining down onto the thick carpet. He didn't sleep. He couldn't eat. The hyper-arousal of his nervous system returned with vengeance, setting his skin on fire. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the plastic ID badge clicking against the glass table. He saw the profound, quiet disappointment in her dark eyes. I do not accept charity from a beggar. Her words echoed in the cavernous penthouse. He was a beggar. He had built an empire of glass and steel, but he was emotionally destitute. When the moment came to defend the only human being who had offered him genuine grace in 20 years, He had protected his stock options. He had protected his pride. By the second week, Tae-jun looked like a corpse. His tailored suits hung off his shrinking frame. He fired director Choi. He didn't offer a severance. He simply destroyed the young man's career with 3 phone calls, blacklisting him from every major financial institution in Seoul. It brought him 0 satisfaction. It was a sterile, useless violence. He had to find her. Tae-jun employed a private intelligence firm. He did not tell them to look for a cleaner. He gave them her name, her age, and told them to find her quietly. It took them 4 days. Winter had fully descended upon Seoul. The wind howling off the mountains carried a biting, metallic frost. Tae-jun's black Maybach navigated the narrow, steep, winding roads of a working-class neighborhood on the northern outskirts of the city. The asphalt was cracked, and the buildings were huddled close together, draped in a tangle of electrical wires. The car stopped in front of a small, dilapidated commercial greenhouse, wedged between a mechanic's garage and a noodle shop. The glass of the greenhouse was fogged with condensation, glowing with a warm, golden subterranean light. Tae-jun stepped out of the car. The freezing wind immediately bit through his cashmere overcoat, chilling him to the bone. He told his driver to wait. He pushed open the heavy wooden door of the greenhouse. A bell jingled above him. The contrast was staggering. Outside was a frozen concrete purgatory. Inside was a chaotic, breathing jungle. The air was heavy, humid, and thick with the smell of wet soil, crushed leaves, and blooming jasmine. The temperature was at least 80 degrees. Overhead, heat lamps cast a honey-colored glow over hundreds of terracotta pots. It smelled like life. It smelled like the tea she used to make him. At the back of the greenhouse, kneeling on a piece of burlap, was Amara. She was wearing denim overalls stained dark with potting soil at the knees, and a thick, oversized wool sweater. Her hands were buried deep in the dirt of a large planter, gently massaging the root ball of a ficus tree. She moved with the same slow, deliberate grace she had used when mopping the marble floors, but here, there was no tension in her shoulders. She belonged to the earth, not the glass. Tae-jun stood in the narrow aisle, blocked by a cascade of hanging ferns. He suddenly felt ridiculous, a billionaire in a $5,000 coat, standing in a dirt-floored nursery. Amara felt the shift in the air draft from the door. She looked up. When she saw him, her hands stilled in the soil. She did not look surprised. She did not look angry. She simply looked tired. "Amara," Tae-jun said. His voice cracked. His throat was painfully dry. She slowly wiped her soil-caked hands on a rag tied to her belt. She stood up, her joints popping audibly in the damp air. "Chairman Park, you are a long way from the sky." "I came to bring you back," Tae-jun said, taking a step forward. The desperate urgency in his chest made him clumsy. "I fired Choi. I cleared your name with HR. I will double your salary, triple it. You don't have to clean. You can be a consultant, a manager, whatever you want." Amara stared at him. The silence between them was no longer comforting. It was a physical barrier. "You think this is about money?" Amara asked softly. The disappointment in her voice was a physical blow to his ribs. "I am trying to fix what I broke," Tae-jun pleaded. He hated how frail he sounded. "You did not break my employment, Chairman. You broke my dignity," Amara said, taking a step toward him. The smell of rich, damp earth radiated off her. "You stood in that room and watched a boy treat me like a thief. You threw me away to protect your reputation. I am not a dog you can kick into the street and then whistle back when you were lonely and cold." Tae-jun physically flinched. The truth of her words stripped the cashmere and the billions away, leaving him naked and shivering. "I was a coward," Tae-jun whispered. The admission tasted like ash in his mouth. "I have spent my entire life building armor. I didn't know how to take it off." "Then you should stay in your armor," Amara said, turning back to her plants. "It is safe there, but you will freeze to death inside it." "Amara, please!" The billionaire's voice broke completely. A single tear, hot and humiliating, traced the deep line of his cheek. "I am dying in the quiet. I cannot sleep. I cannot breathe." Amara stopped. She looked over her shoulder at the broken man standing in the aisle of ferns. She saw the profound, catastrophic grief in his posture. But pity was not love, and pity was not respect. "Go home, Tae-jun," Amara said. It was the first time she had ever used his name. It felt like a lock clicking into place. You want me to heal you, but I am not medicine. I am a woman. Until you learn the difference, do not come back. Tae-jun stood there for a long time, listening to the drip of condensation falling from the glass ceiling into the damp soil. He realized then that all his wealth was counterfeit currency in the economy of the human soul. He turned around, pushed through the door, and walked back out into the freezing wind. The transformation of Park Tae-jun did not happen overnight. Armor forged over 40 years takes time to dismantle. He didn't send flowers. He didn't send checks. He understood now that Amara viewed his money as an insult, a shield he used to avoid paying the true cost of human connection. If he wanted her, he had to pay in the only currency she respected, humility. 2 weeks later, Tae-jun returned to the greenhouse. He didn't bring the Maybach. He took a taxi. He walked through the wooden door, wearing a faded pair of cotton trousers and a simple knit sweater. Amara was moving heavy bags of fur late near the back counter. Tae-jun didn't announce himself. He quietly walked over, picked up the other end of the 50-pound bag, and helped her hoist it onto the table. Amara looked at him, her eyes narrowing. She saw the lack of a driver outside. She saw the dust accumulating on his simple clothes. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Learning the difference between a shield and a man," Tae-jun replied quietly. He grabbed a hand trowel. "What needs to be repotted?" For 3 months, the chairman of the Haesung Corporation disappeared from the high society circuits of Seoul. Instead, 3 days a week, he was kneeling in the damp earth of a northern district greenhouse. He learned how to mix soil. He learned the exact humidity required to coax a stubborn orchid into bloom. His manicured hands grew calluses. The deep purple shadows under his eyes faded entirely. The insomnia vanished, replaced by the heavy, honest exhaustion of physical labor and genuine peace. Amara watched him change. She watched the billionaire dissolve into the dirt, and a quiet, steadfast man emerge from the soil. The silence between them grew warm again. They shared tea from the dented thermos. They shared stories of their youth. She told him of the baobab trees in Senegal, and he told her of the sea winds of Busan. When he finally asked her to marry him, he didn't do it with a diamond the size of a golf ball. They were sitting on overturned plastic buckets drinking tea. He simply reached out, his soil-stained fingers wrapping gently around her rough, aged hand. "I am tired of leaving," Tae-jun said softly, the golden light of the heat lamps reflecting in his clear eyes. "I want to stay, forever." Amara looked down at his hand holding hers. The contrast of their skin, his pale and weathered, hers dark and deeply lined, was a map of 2 entire worlds colliding. She smiled, a slow, radiant expression that made Tae-jun's chest ache with gratitude. "Then stay," she whispered. The Haesung Corporation annual gala was the absolute pinnacle of Seoul's elite social calendar. It was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most opulent hotel. Chandeliers dripped with Austrian crystal, catching the flashes of the press corps waiting behind the velvet ropes. The room was a sea of black tuxedos and designer silk. The board of directors, the junior executives, the politicians, they were all waiting. Rumors had circulated that Chairman Park was finally going to announce his retirement and name a successor. Some whispered he had secretly married a Chaebol heiress to solidify a corporate merger. At exactly 8 p.m., the massive gold-leaf doors of the ballroom swung open. A sudden, heavy silence swept across the room like a cold front. The string quartet in the corner fumbled their notes and faded into a shocked halt. Chairman Park Tae-jun walked in. He looked healthier, younger, and more formidable than he had in a decade. He was wearing a classic black tuxedo, but it was the woman on his arm that paralyzed the room. Amara walked beside him, her spine perfectly straight, her chin held high with the effortless grace of a queen. She was 63 years old, and she was breathtaking. She wore an exquisite custom gown, a brilliant fusion of a traditional Korean hanbok silhouette crafted from a stunning, deep emerald African wax print fabric. The rich green and gold patterns caught the chandelier light, making her glow against the sea of monotonous black and white. Her stark white hair was cropped close, drawing every eye to the regal structure of her cheekbones and the quiet, fierce intelligence in her dark eyes. The executives who had mocked her, the men and women who had complained about her mop bucket, who had covered their noses in the elevator, stood frozen, their champagne flutes hovering near their open mouths. The former HR director paled, physically stepping backward into a waiter. Tae-jun led Amara through the parting crowd. He didn't look at the flashing cameras. He didn't look at the gaping mouths of his board members. He only looked at her. He guided her up the 3 carpeted steps to the main podium. He adjusted the microphone. The screech of audio feedback made a few executives flinch. "For 40 years, Tae-jun's voice boomed through the speakers, deep and resonant. "I built this company on the belief that value is determined by a ledger, by stock prices, by the clothes a person wears, or the title on their door." He turned and looked at Amara. The severe lines of his face softened into absolute devotion. "I was wrong," Tae-jun continued, turning back to the paralyzed crowd. "True value is invisible to those who are blinded by their own pride. 6 months ago, many of you in this room walked past a woman who scrubbed the floors you walk on. Some of you mocked her. Some of you actively tried to destroy her to protect your own fragile egos." The silence in the ballroom was suffocating. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Several executives broke out in a cold sweat, staring at the floor. "This woman," Tae-jun reached out, taking Amara's hand in front of the entire room, "did not just clean the dirt from our floors. She cleaned the rot from my soul. She is my peace. She is my equal. And as of this morning, she is my wife." A collective, silent gasp rippled through the room. Amara looked out over the crowd. She recognized the faces. She remembered the snickers, the spilled coffee, the cruel whispers. But standing there, feeling the warm, calloused grip of her husband's hand, she felt no desire for vengeance. Vengeance was a heavy stone, and she had finally put it down for good. She felt only a profound, soaring lightness. The flashes of the cameras erupted like a localized lightning storm, immortalizing the moment. The billionaire and the cleaner. 2 people who had walked through the fire of the world and found the only thing that couldn't be burned. "We spend our entire lives building armor," Tae-jun thought, looking at his wife's radiant smile, chasing gold and glass to protect ourselves from the cold. But what if the warmth we are, desperately searching for, is hiding in the very people we have been taught to overlook? Look closely at the people in the background of your life today, the ones holding the doors, wiping the tables, walking quietly through the shadows. What invisible heavy stones are they carrying? And more importantly, what profound, life-changing magic are you missing simply because you forgot to look them in the eye?